My name is Josh Carsonson. Get to serve as the lead pastor here. We're going to hit a huge chunk of scripture today. So bear with me. Genesis 41. Here we go. After 2 whole years. Gary leaned into that last week. That's a long time. Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears. That's ears of corn probably, or grain. The first hour got a little bit confusing. People were thinking ears on the head. Not that this isn't Ezekiel. And blighted by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump, full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirit was troubled. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants, and he put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. When we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed in the reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the thin, ugly cows ate up the first 7 cows, but when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still as ugly as the beginning. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing from one stalk, full and good. 7 ears withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 ears, good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Halftime. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land. By reason of the famine will follow, for it will be very severe. And the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man, and let him and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land, and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it. That food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. Now comes the really, really good part that we've been waiting for. This proposal pleased Pharaoh and all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards the throne, will I be greater than you?" And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over all the land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him with garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he made him ride in his second chariot, and they called out before him, "Bow the knee." Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift up a hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephanath-Paneah, and he gave him in marriage Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I feel like I should get a clap or something. That was, whoo! Thank you. If you got a journal, page 46, we take notes in this. A great resource to take notes, to take back home, to really interact with some of the things that we're wrestling with here. If you did not get one, we got a stack of them. They are free. It's our gift to you. We'd love for you to have one. They are on the way in. In 1,056 words, I believe we see the biggest transformation of any single human being in the history of the world. Prove me wrong. Right? I cannot think of another story where someone goes from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high in the amount of time that he goes in. Like, it is the fastest rags to riches story you will ever read anywhere, right? And the crazy thing is, it's a true story, right? This is not just an analogy. It's not just typology. Like, it's not just a fable or a fairy tale. Like, we believe this is the inspired word of God, which means we believe that this is a true story, and it's a crazy story, right? If you've been following with us over the last 5 weeks, it starts out, and it is like Joseph is in a very dark place. Like, he is in the low of the lows. You remember the very last words from last week. Joseph's in prison, right? He's been in prison somewhere between probably 3 years and 10 years. The very first words of this is after 2 years, so we know he was waiting for a long time. But the very last words from last week were Joseph was forgotten. He's forgotten in prison. He's forgotten in prison after a long run of being abandoned, of being abused, of being like mistreated. Like, his own family, like, these are the people who should rally around him, like, who should say family first. Like, yeah, we have our differences, but we'll work through it. Like, his own brothers, like, they're going to kill him. But they figured, like, hey, we could actually make some money on this, so it's even worse. I feel like it's even worse. It's like, we're going to profit off of you. They sell him. We read last week in Psalm 105 that he had a collar of iron around his neck, right? He had shackles around his feet. He's walking 300 miles around people who no one speaks his language, right? We don't know exactly what life was like in Potiphar's house. We know a few things, but there's a ton that we don't know, right? We know he's falsely accused. He's thrown into prison. Like, those are the moments where you're just like, are you serious, God? Like, I've done all the things that I should do, and nothing has gone well here. He's forgotten. You ever felt like you're forgotten? Like, you're around a group of people, and you just have the feelings and the thoughts of, like, I don't know that anyone would care if I wasn't here. Right? Maybe you feel that way in your own home. Right? Joseph's in this pit, and he's forgotten. And we use just this story, this kind of imagery of the pit. Last week, our young adults pastor, Gary, he just talked about the pit, and some of us are just like, we know what life is like in the pit. Some of us have been there in the past, right? Whether it's relationally, physically, financially, there's a million reasons why we might be there. We know what that's like. And in this story, we go from the lowest of the low. There's no hope to the highest of the high. Like, Joseph in this story, he goes from collar around his neck to gold chain. Right? He goes from single, good-looking guy in prison to now married with a wife. He goes from, like, forgotten to everywhere he goes, they call out his name and they say, bow the knee, and everyone bows the knee. Right? Like, he's given the king's signet ring, right? Which is essentially the king's credit card in the king's army. Right? And this is not just this isn't just like, some random little tiny place. This is Egypt, the longest lasting empire in the history of the world, a 3,000-year empire that 5,000 years later, we today go to and we say, have no idea how you did that. Right? If you've seen the pyramids, I've seen them with my own eyes. We're still going, wow, how'd they do that? Right? And Joseph is second in command. Right? This is such a leap. It's such a bigger leap than just winning the lottery. Right? I was talking to someone recently who works with the lottery. It's kind of fascinating hearing the ins and outs of the lottery. But you think about the lottery right now. Let's say that you are homeless or houseless and just totally destitute, and you win the lottery. You win $1 billion. Right? Let's say that's the take-home pay for all you geeks who are well, take home and tax. Okay, let's say you take home $1 billion. There's still a lot more people who are way more wealthy than you. Right? Elon's pushing $500 billion right now. Right? And Elon himself, I heard him in an interview recently. He said, well, I'm not the most powerful man in the world. Right? He referred to Putin. He's like, Putin's way more powerful than me. He can control armies. He's sovereign over a nation. Well, here's Pharaoh. I would contend that Pharaoh has more power than Putin. Right? Because not only does he have sovereign power over a nation, he's worshipped as God. Think about this. The Egyptians fully believed that Pharaoh literally was the divine embodiment of the gods. He was worshipped as God. So much so that when a Pharaoh would die, they would sacrifice all kinds of people to throw him in, kind of embalming afterlife death with him so that they would be deified with him in the future. And here's Joseph now, and he's number 2 to the guy that rules this nation, who the nation worships as God. That is a huge jump. So much so that I think if you didn't grow up in the church, I think you look at this story and you go there's no way that's real. I think if you grew up in the church, you're yeah, it's the story of Joseph. We all believe that. But I think if you look at the story, you go really? In one day, you go from being enslaved for 13 years to leading this nation. I think most people who are rational are looking at that going oh, it's a nice fairy tale, or maybe it's a folklore and we can learn some things from it. But as a Christian, I believe this story is true. So how is it possible that this story is true? It's such a wild story. It's such a wild jump. Again, find me afterwards. If you can find a story of someone in the history of the world who had a bigger jump, I would love to hear it. I don't think there is. But how is this story true? I want to make the argument today. I want to make 2 arguments. The first one is this. The only way for this story to be true is if the God of the Bible is true, right? And so I'm going to walk through that a little bit, and then I'm going to talk about how even if you don't believe this story is true, that your soul wants this story to be true. And we're going to walk through why all of us want this story from the pit to the palace to be a true story, right? And how ultimately we're going to see God who gives us a better story than just the story of Joseph here. So let's start with this first question of how can this story of Joseph possibly be true? Right, again, I think if you take a rational look at it, I think the rational human being sees this and goes, there's no way that's possibly true. Now, how is this story possibly true? It's true for one reason. God breaks through. The only reason that Joseph is where he is, from the pit to the palace, is because of the activity of God. Think about what God does. God inserts himself into the dreams of someone who is worshipped as God on earth, right? And he says, hey, here's what's going to happen. Here's what I'm going to do. God breaks through in a supernatural way, in a way that there's no way to have any other explanation than for the Pharaoh himself to say, you're right, there's an authority that's greater than me, and let's watch this play out as I empower Joseph to be in this role. For us, we have to think if we're in the pit, if we're in the darkest place that we're possibly in, the only way that there's an explanation to get out of it anywhere near the spot that Joseph got into is by the power of God. Right? The power of God is able to take someone from the lowest of low to the highest of high. God breaks through here. There's no other way that this story makes sense unless God does something here. Right? Verse 25, it makes it very clear. Pharaoh recognizes that God is doing something. Then Joseph says to Pharaoh, I'm going to bounce around a little bit, but here's some of these words. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. So Pharaoh hears this from Joseph, and he goes, you're right. This is true. He recognizes in Joseph the Spirit of God, right? So here's the most powerful man in the world, and he's going, I know you have something that I don't have. Right? Isn't that wild? I know you have something that I don't have, and I'm going to put you in charge because I want God on my side. Right? This should be wildly encouraging to us. Right? It should be wildly encouraging for so many reasons. I'm going to get into this today. But the only way that this story is true is because God breaks in, and he breaks in via a dream. Right? 5 weeks ago, JJ, our music guy, he kind of introduced this whole story of Joseph, and it starts with dreams. Right? If you remember how the story began, it started with Joseph getting a bunch of dreams, and JJ said that God still speaks through dreams. He spoke through multiple dreams in the past, and he speaks through dreams today. And there's probably like 5 or 6 times in my life where I've gone, absolutely, without a shadow of doubt, that was God speaking in a dream. I've shared a number of these stories with you guys over the years. One of my favorite ones that I've shared with you before is a number of years ago, my wife and I, we were having kind of a Bible study with someone who was kind of searching, trying to figure out if they believed in Christianity, and we'd meet with them once a week, and we went through the whole Bible. Like, we didn't read the whole thing, but we kind of just outlined it, and after a number of weeks, like, we kind of spelled it all out, and we're like, yep, here's the Bible, here's what it is, like, here's theology, here's who God is, here's who mankind is, and after multiple weeks, he's like, okay, like, I understand it, I get the story, but I don't believe it. Like, I want to believe it, but I don't believe it yet. I understand it, but I don't believe it. And so my wife and I, that week, we prayed, not with him, but we just prayed like, God, would you show yourself to this man in a dream next week? Comes back next week, and he goes, guys, you'll never believe what happened to me. I'm like, oh, try me. He says, Jesus showed up in a dream and showed me who he was. And that night, he put his faith in Jesus. We baptized him at this church. I mean, just wild story. Like, God can do that. And I have heard so many stories like that. It's also important to know, like, God doesn't always speak in dreams. Like, sometimes we have dreams that are like, no, that definitely was not God. Right? I had one of these Thursday night. I have this dream. I'm in my office, and I'm in kind of like a counseling session. It's like me and one other guy, and we're just talking about life. It's pretty deep, and in walks a woman, and she walks in with like a teenage son, and she just totally interrupts our meeting, and she goes, man, I've been looking for you forever. This is your son. And I'm like, that's impossible. Like, no, that's not my son. The guy who's sitting there in this counseling session is looking at me like, what kind of church is this? What kind of pastor are you? And I'm feeling like Mary in like the mother of Jesus type moment. I'm like, in my dream, I'm just like, what is happening? This is not true. And she plops down this like folder. She says like, this is a DNA test proving that this kid is mine. And I'm like starting to really stress out. I'm like, this is not possible. And at some point I like asked her like, well, like, when was this kid born? She was like, 2009. I'm like, I was not living in this country for those 2 years. There's no way it's possibly mine. And then I wake up, and the first thing on my mind was, thank God not all dreams are from you. Like, I don't know where that came from, but goodness. And then I thought, but maybe it was from God to show me that not all dreams are from God. What an analogy that could be in a sermon. Like, I'll just chew on that theology for later. Back to Joseph. This story should be insanely encouraging. Right? Think about Joseph like the night before he gets out. Like, if you were to ask him, hey, do you think tomorrow that it's possible that you'd be given the king's signet ring and that you'd be riding in the king's chariot and that people would shout out, bow the knee before you, and that you'd be dressed in fine linen and you'd have the wife of your dreams? Like, do you think that that would have been possible in Joseph's mind the night before he gets out? I doubt it. And so I think it's important to occasionally sit before the Lord and say, God, there's some things that if I'm honest, like, I don't know that you're big enough to do. And I think it's important to say, God, I actually believe that you can do bigger than I could ever ask or imagine. And I think this story should be one of those insanely encouraging stories that if God is in the story, anything's possible. Like, it might take a while, right? Joseph, he was in there 13 years. Like, that's not exactly, a walk in the park. That's a long time. That's a lot of suffering. That's a lot of preparation, right? We talked about 2 weeks ago. Like, this testing period, right? God's about to give Joseph this insane amount of responsibility, and he's preparing him for that. But that's a long time. But it also should be wildly encouraging because we recognize that if God's in the story, Like God can do anything. Right? So no matter what is going on in your life or your parents' life, or your kid's life, your spouse's life, or your work world, right? Like God can do anything. Right? And we're going to look at the story and we're going to look at like, why do I want this story to be true? Why do I want it to be true that God can do anything? Right? Even if I don't believe it. Some of us are here and we're not Christians yet and we're still trying to figure out, do I believe this? I want to contend with you today that you want this story to be true. Right? And I'll tell you why. I'm going to give you 4 reasons why we deeply want the story of Joseph to be true. We'll start with this. We want this story to be true because we all long for a God who is good. Right? Think about this. There's not one person in this room, even if you don't believe in God, that wouldn't want a God to exist who exists for your good. Right? There's not one person who would say, nah, I don't want a God that can take me from the pit to the palace. Everyone would want that. Everyone would want a God who says, hey, here's a nation that's far from me. Right? The nation of Egypt, they didn't follow God as God. Right? They had all kinds of evil pagan gods that they worshiped. And yet, God in his kindness says, hey, there's a famine coming and I care deeply about you guys. Like, I'm going to place someone over you so that your nation doesn't go into starvation. Right? Like, God's doing something in this. He cares about people. Like, we all would want this type of God to exist. We all would want a God who sees Joseph in his pain and goes, hey, I'm doing something in your pain and I have a future for you. Right? Wouldn't we all want that? Like in this story, it could have easily been that Joseph just does his thing. He interprets Pharaoh's dream, and Pharaoh's like, sweet, thanks, peace out, now go back to prison. Right? But God's like, no, I actually care about the nation as a whole, and I care about you, Joseph. I'm going to restore you. Right? We want that. We all want a God who is good. Not only do we want a God who is good, but we want a God who is powerful. Right? It says up there, we want this story to be true because we long for a God who is powerful. If God was only good but not powerful, like that wouldn't be very helpful. Right? There's a lot of things that are good that aren't that powerful. Like I think about my dog. I have a pretty good dog. I'm not much of a dog guy, but he's pretty good as far as dogs go. Not very powerful. Like can't really do a lot. Right? Some of us, sorry, maybe bad example. If God was good, let's say that he looks out on this nation and is like, man, I feel bad for Egypt. Or he looks at Joseph and he's like, man, I feel bad for you. I wish that I could do something about it, but wasn't powerful enough to do anything. Like, we wouldn't want that kind of God. But in this story, God shows up to the leading guy of Egypt and breaks through in a way that only God can do. Like, that's insanely powerful. Like God does that. Not only is he good, but he is powerful, and we long for this, right? We want a God who can show up in the darkest of places. We want a God that in the midst of our despair, in the midst of our pit, in the midst of our turmoil, and whatever we're going through, we want a God who's like, no, I actually can't. I have the authority and the power to do something. We all would want this. We want the story to be true also because we want to know that our faithfulness in small things matter. So follow me. Joseph is brought out of jail because God breaks through and gives Pharaoh a vision, right? He speaks to him in a dream. Joseph also gets out of prison because he was faithful in small things, right? What do I mean by small things? A couple of weeks ago, or last week rather, when Gary was speaking, he was talking about Joseph's time in prison. And when he was in prison, 2 people had dreams, right? The cupbearer and the baker. Good, right? Cupbearer and baker, they both have dreams. They come to Joseph and they say, hey, we have a dream. Now, how easy would it have been for Joseph in that moment to be like, dude, good for you. Have your dream. Go live your life. I'm living my life. Right? How easy would it have been for Joseph in that moment to say, you know what? I'm just really angry. I'm in this jail. I don't deserve to be here. Like, I'm in here unjustly. Like, he easily could have just brushed off helping anyone else. He could have just been frustrated. He could have been discouraged. He could have said, you know what, guys? I got kids' soccer practice. I got volleyball. Like, at least in my mind, I'm just imagining all these things. I don't have time for you. But what does he do? In the midst of, like, potentially being discouraged, he's like, hey, I'm going to meet your needs. I'm going to help people around me. I'm going to do small things. And it turns out that when he was faithful in doing those small things, they remembered him multiple years later. Like, I promise you, at some point, Joseph was like, thank God I was nice to that guy, right? When that guy's like, hey, Pharaoh, I remembered someone in prison. Right, so think about us. Where are the small areas in our life, the really small areas, where God's just saying, hey, I need you to be faithful in this, right? Where do you need to be faithful in a friendship, right? Where do you need to be faithful in just the mundane business of doing everyday life, right? Because Joseph was faithful. We're going to talk about this a whole lot more next week under this whole idea of being a steward with his life. But in Joseph's life, he was faithful, and God provided for him, right? He was faithful in his conversations with Pharaoh. Think about this. He wasn't trying to manipulate Pharaoh. Like, how easy would it have been for Joseph in this moment? He's like, okay, this is my chance. Yo, Pharaoh, I would love to tell you your dream, but let's make a little arrangement here because I'm in jail. Like, you get me out of jail forever, and then I'll tell you what this dream means. Like, he could have manipulated the situation. If I'm him, I think I'm manipulating the dream a little bit. I think I'm going, hey, here's what this dream means. It means that there was someone who was unjustly thrown into prison. Like these cows, they're like this guy, but he could be risen up in power, and he could take revenge on his family, and then we could all save the world. Like, it would be really easy to, in that moment, like, not be faithful with what's in front of you, but simply use what's in front of you for what feels like your own personal gain. Right? Isn't that easy for us sometimes? To be like, okay, here's this situation. Like, here's this friendship. How can I use that for my gain? Right? Here's this work situation. How can I use that for my gain? But you notice in Joseph, like, even when he's interpreting the dream, he's just like, no, it's not me. First of all, he takes no credit for it. He's like, this isn't me. He doesn't insert himself into the story anywhere. He's just like, here's what God says. Here's what you should do. And in being faithful with that, God then in return blesses Joseph. And he's like, oh yeah, here, I have something for you. We want to believe that our faithfulness in small things matter. Right? So a good question for us, where's the small things in my life that I need to be faithful in? Right? Where do I need to be faithful? Do I need to be faithful in what I'm watching? Do I need to be faithful in, like, the conversations that I'm having? Right? Am I speaking ill towards people who aren't in the room? Right? Where do I need to be faithful in small things, trusting that God will use that in big ways later on? Lastly, we want this story to be true because it tells us that God can dramatically change our lives for the better. Now, for some of us, this doesn't seem like that big of a deal because for some of us, we feel like we've got life pretty sweet. Right? Maybe you got your nice little family, or you got school going well, and you got a good GPA, and you got a lot of future ahead of you, and you're like, okay, whatever, like, my life's good. But that's not true for everyone. I got an email that I want to read to you guys. This is to a friend of a friend. This is someone I met last year, someone who is in my home. They're in Ukraine right now, and I just want you to hear about life in Ukraine right now. He says this. He says, unfortunately, the situation in Ukraine has worsened. Children hardly attend school anymore, which means they're missing out on education. Many parents are very worried. Recently, we faced several major attacks on critical infrastructure. All our main power stations, including the combined heat and power plant, were hit by Russian drones. As a result, we only have about 4 hours of electricity each day, and water outages happen regularly. We praise God that winter hasn't started yet, but it feels like Russia is just beginning this new wave of attacks. At one point, people were making fires outside their apartments to cook food for their families. Some areas of our city have already been without electricity for more than 36 hours. We completely depend on God. He is the only hope for Ukraine. My family is under a lot of pressure right now because of all these circumstances. So you can imagine how difficult it is for children from crisis families. We're working hard to stay close to them and support both the kids and their parents during these challenging times. The greatest need we see at the moment is children's education. Many of them haven't studied for almost 4 months. We understand how serious the long-term impact this will be. Many mothers are desperate, trying to find peace in alcohol or even more often in light drugs. Of course, their children see this and are at great risk of following their example. While I'm writing this letter, 2 Russian drones are flying above as I write. In moments like these, it's difficult to remain calm and to keep trusting God. My human nature wants to act and fix things. I start thinking, God, why aren't you doing anything? I'll take it from here. I think we all experience this from time to time. The greater the pressure, the harder it becomes to truly trust God. But thank God for his word and his promises. And he quotes Habakkuk 3:17, which is, if you know this context, is brutal. He says, though the fig tree does not bud and there are no grapes on the vines, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. All the work we are doing, we will continue to do. It will become more challenging, but we haven't stopped or even slowed down because many children are falling behind in school, whether due to lack of electricity, internet, air alarms, or simply discouragement. We're now creating a special learning space in our day center to help them keep up with their studies. Our teachers and mentors will work with them one-on-one to support their education. Right now, we're tired but not broken. We'll keep serving, sharing the gospel, and standing firm in faith, even in the midst of these difficult times. Thank you for being close to us and for your faithful support of our ministry and our team. With gratitude and prayers, Bogdan and the Lifesong team. Right, these aren't ancient words. Right, these are words from someone who's been in my house, someone who has a wife just like mine, whose kids jumped on my trampoline with my kids. This is someone who is living in the middle of a pit, and it's I can't. It's hard. It feels unfair even just to read this sometimes. I'm our life is so easy. And here's why we want this story of Joseph to be true. If the story of Joseph is true, it's true in the context of a greater story, the story of the gospel. And the gospel says if you're a believer, life on earth, this is as hard as it gets. For Bogdan, this is as hard as it gets. We're living in the pit. Earth is the pit, and heaven is our palace. Right, which we got to hold on to if you're a believer. You got to hold on to the fact that right now, here on earth, this is the pit, and the promise is the palace is coming. If you're not a believer, this is the palace. This is as good as life gets. This, and the future is the pit. But for Bogdan, who loves the Lord, he can have hope, and he can go, okay, yes, this is crazy brutal. And this is a guy who he could get out if he wants. And he's like, no, God's called me to be here. I need to be a hope for people who don't have hope. Man, the greatest story, I'll tell you what, this is a good story. The story of Joseph's good, but it's in the middle of a much greater story. Here's why it's a good story. The story of Joseph is a good story. You think about someone who's innocently thrown into prison, right? After 13 years, they're rescued, and they're now living in opulence, and now they're going to save the world, right? There's clearly some Jesus typology going on in some beautiful ways that we'll look at in the next few weeks. But for Joseph, it's a good story, but it's not a great story. And it's good because, yeah, it's a good story, but he also suffers for 13 years. I'll tell you what, this would be a great story, though. What if the story was different? What if the story went like this? Here's Joseph. He's a free man. At 17, he had a bunch of frat boys cruise up to Egypt, and one night he assaults the king's daughter, the Pharaoh's daughter, and he kills one of the king's sons. On his own free will, he just wants to do it. And he's caught and he's thrown into prison. And he has execution awaiting him. And the night before his execution date, Pharaoh comes in and he says, hey, I forgive you, and I want you to come and live in the palace as one of my sons. And in order for that to happen, I actually have to give up and have one of my sons killed in order to bring you here. Right? For Joseph, that would be a great story. Right? And that's the story of the gospel, right? That's the story of Jesus Christ, because you and I would be the same in that scenario. We are guilty. We're not innocently thrown into prison and go from the pit to the palace. We're guilty. We're in the pit because we deserve to be in the pit, right? We actively rebel against God, right? We actively give God the middle finger and we say, I'm doing my life the way I want to do my life. And the result of that is eternal separation from God. And God sees us in that pit, sees us in that prison, and says, I'm going to get you out of here. But the only way to get you out of here is I'm going to sacrifice my son for that. And I'm going to give you the option. Are you going to believe in that? Are you going to trust me in that? And if so, you're coming to the palace with me. And if not, you can stay in the pit, and you can stay away from me for the rest of your life. That's a great story. Right, so as we close, I want to give us an opportunity to think through that story. Both if you're a believer and if you're not sure yet. For the believer, we're going to give us an opportunity to get up. And no, not get up this hour. We have communion at your own seat. And I want you to reflect on this story, and I want you to think about what it took for the king to say, hey, I'm going to give my son so that you can be free. And then if you're not a believer yet, I want you to seriously ponder this story because it's a good story. It's a story that if you look at it, you go like, yes, that makes sense. I want that. Right? If you're not a believer yet, I want you to just realize like right now, life is as good as it will ever get. Like you can do what you want to make this life nice. And in Corvallis, Oregon right now, you can have a relatively nice life. Some of us have some nice homes. We drive some nice cars. We get to shop in some nice places and, do whatever you want to do. You can kind of church up your nice little palace here. But the pit's coming. Like life away from God is coming. If you haven't accepted Jesus, life away from God, that is your future. And the invitation is simply to say, Jesus, thank you for your life. I accept that for my rebellion against you. And I will take that and I will be with you in the palace. And this will be my pit. I'm going to give us some time. I'm going to pray. The band's going to come up. They're going to play a song while we're doing communion. And you just take it on your own. And we're going to reflect on God's goodness here. Father God, this is such a good story that reminds us of such a great story. God, I pray that we would just take a serious look right now at what we deeply believe. God, have I accepted the fact that I have rebelled against you and that I am in a pit? And that pit is life away from you, God. And the only way out, the only way to the palace is through the gift and the sacrifice and the offering of the King's Son. And God, have I made that proclamation that I believe that? Man, if someone is in this room right now and who has not done that, I just want to give you an opportunity right now to simply say, Jesus, I believe that you did that for me. And I want life with you. I don't want life away from you anymore. I want life with you. I want life with you now, and I want the palace with you in eternity. God, for those of us who have made that profession, I pray that we would find a boldness in our faith, that we would find a steadiness, a steadfastness. God, that in the middle of the great times here, or the horrible times, that like Joseph, we would be stewards of what you've given us, that we'd be faithful in the small things. God, that we'd be faithful to our families, we'd be faithful to our friends, that we'd be faithful in our work. God, that we would not be so preoccupied with my own interests that I'd forget to serve those around me, that you'd call me like Joseph to be a servant and a steward. And God, that you'd be preparing me for something better. God, give us a heart and a mind to say, whatever it takes, I'm all in. Whatever it takes, I'm willing to be a servant because, God, you gave everything for me and you brought me from the pit to the palace. We pray this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen. Love you guys.